Hello, everyone. Welcome to Morbid Symptoms. I'm your host, Tara Van Dyke, and I'm happy to be joined with Nassim. Nassim is being a bit cloak and dagger. His video isn't working, so he's in voice only. Uh, um,
Yeah, ruin things.
no, it's all right. At least I have a nice avatar I can look at. As long as I have something I can look at, I don't feel like I'm participating in some sort of hostage video. So, if you could tell our viewers a bit about yourself.
So a longtime member of the left, communist supporter, former member of the GC, and also one of the people who wrote up a lot of the ideology for the super straight bullshit that happened in 2021.
It said super straight bullshit, which I'm not familiar with.
Remember when COVID happened? There was this real pushback against trans with
Oh, yeah.
super straight, and it was crushed within about a month. Wrote up a lot of that stuff, ideology, just so the kids had some primer to throw at the.
So you're old school.
Yes, I could never agree with that sort of nonsense because it just. Nothing of it makes sense. It's like one thing to sit there and say, all right, you should just let these people be. Okay, that's fine. Who cares about that?
Mhm.
But this is about like sitting there saying, oh, well, a man says he's a woman, therefore everyone must agree and treat him exactly like a woman. Well, that causes a lot of problems. A lot of problems.
Well, we will have to have you back on to talk about that because that in itself is a huge thing in terms of, and also making the differentiation between what gets lumped together under the left when there's a lot of things that are quite contradictory. For example, those of us who don't pretend that men can be women and women can be men, that are aware of how dangerous it is as a precedence to set. However, that is for another time. We have two stories or events that we want to deal with today. A young woman who was killed on a metro line in Charlotte has struck off a firestorm again about race, law and order, identity politics, and wokeism. And then we also are going to talk about Qatar. Israel bombed Qatar the other day to assassinate some Hamas officials that were there under the pretense of negotiating this never ending negotiation over a ceasefire. I'm calling that the Imperial Triangle, the United States, Israel, and the Gulf states.
Like, there is a want in this country from both the left and the right, the liberals and whatnot, to get like this quasi race war going.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Because if you look at it, it's like the end result of let's focus all on grievances, just nothing but grievances. And at the same time, we're going to let we're going to loosen the criminal justice system. And what's the right going to do? The right's going to ignore the violence of, white criminals killing white people. They're going to ignore that. They're going to center on the interracial. So they can say, hey, look, this. And so you get this constant feeding off of each other while nothing is ever done. No one's actually advocating for anything to stop this other than more police funding and then crack down on, well, Black community.
Mhm.
Well, that's not going to change anything. They know that. It's all a game to cause more problems within the society. Everything is basically the Southern strategy over and over and over again.
And can you say a bit about the Southern strategy for those of us who aren't familiar with it or maybe need a bit of a refresher?
So, Southern strategy came up with the Republicans. It was the way they wanted to deal with the New Deal. They understood that they were attacking the American people's unity by arguing, you have your own interests and you break down by regional, state, and local by local, arguing that you don't have the same interests as other Americans. So you play on a certain form of identity. And then what you find is as you expand on this identity, you have to further atomize and get these people to constantly be at each other's throats. I mean, think about this. As when the anti-racism campaign started in 2014, by 2016, race relations were starting to decline.
Mm.
You have this constant pressure from the liberals and the right that completely feeds into one another.
And for people who aren't aware, this happened in the United States, and I'll just go through what we know for sure. In terms of the perpetrator, the victim, you can't get more black and white than this. There was a young woman, Iryna Zarutska, who was a Ukrainian refugee. I don't know how long her family had been in the States, a couple of years, I imagine. And she was stabbed to death on August 27th, 2025, on a Charlotte Lynx Blue Line train. DeCarlos Brown Jr. was arrested at the scene and charged with first-degree murder. On September 9th, the Trump administration got involved. I have that picture on our thumbnail here of the press secretary. They filed federal charges because it was on the mass transit system, so they could pull some sort of jurisdiction there. So this is what we know for sure has happened, and what's caused a bit of a firestorm in terms of racism and wokeism and moralism. One thing, this got hardly any media coverage from the quote unquote mainstream media, and that it would have gotten pushed to the side if it wasn't for the right wing or alternative media saying, hey, what's going on here? Look at this crazy story. They're quite certain that if the races had been switched around, we'd have riots again. It'd be a George Floyd 2.0. What do you think? I think they probably have a point about that.
In the United States, we really don't care about any crime but the interracial crime, it seems. This is horrible. This shouldn't happen. There's no argument here that this should not happen. The question should be, why was this person allowed, out of jail so many times? This guy's been arrested for violence, and yet he's posted on bail and allowed to, go where he wants with a knife. So you have another attack. I posted on my Twitter of this guy beating this girl, shooting her dead on the streets of Philly. Okay. And what makes the national news? What makes the national news is what's going to be divisive and get everyone angry. Again, everything's selected here. Both of them are gruesome, and both of them should definitely cause Americans to go, well, why is our system going so crazy? The media didn't want to focus on her because that makes all these liberals look bad every time.
Yeah.
Yes. Because they want you to think that every person that it goes into the prison is some form of ultra victim of circumstance. That's the moralism, that all the people who go to prison, they had hard lives. Don't you see? It's not them, it's their hard life. Well, you can only push that stuff if you're somebody who's like some upper class or middle class person who's never lived outside of your own bubble, because it just flies in the face. It really plays off the idea that people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are like this ignorant bunch of rubes that don't understand anything of the world. They're just animals that can't understand right from wrong.
And of course, you can't, very few people, I would imagine, can see anything like this and not think Jesus. Because it's not just the fact that it was totally random. That you see this young woman get on, she just sits there, and he just seems to, like, he just decided to put in a piece of gum or something, stabs her, leaves, and then the people around her are just like not doing anything. Yeah.
That's rather jarring to people, but back in the 90s, it used to be a normal thing in New York City where if somebody got attacked, killed, or whatnot, people would just walk over their body. People wouldn't get involved. So you have a society that's largely, if somebody gets attacked or hurt, I ain't going to do anything. The video that I talked about, the one where the black girl was killed, this guy was beating her. The only person that tried to stop was this other woman who ran up and was trying to pull him off of her and stop the whole fight. And he just threw her off, and finally he shot.
And I think that we tend to want to cast ourselves in the heroic light. Like if I was in that situation, and of course, unless you're in a situation like that, you really don't know what you would do. It looks bad, and I agree with you that it's a mistake to zero in on the race part of it, because both sides of the bourgeois politics, left to right, want to do that.
Yes. Well, remember, like in the 90s or 80s, the Polytechnic massacre in Canada, where a guy walked into a room, told all the men to get out, and then killed all the women in the room. People can talk about the heroicness and whatnot, but it's rare in America or in any Western state you see people standing up for the victim. Most people, just go walking on. This is a very atomized society.
Well, I want to make sure we spend some time talking about not just the woke part of it or the moralism, but also the lumpenism. What goes under the left these days is the PMC on top, and then the lumpens on the bottom that they get to, I don't know, care about and kind of bow before, kind of freaks to the front. And then you have What I think you would probably want to plug and associate yourself with was a Marxist, quite more disciplined left that really doesn't have any toleration for being soft on crime, so to speak, or the first take isn't going to be what we need to do about crime and social malaise. We need to abolish the police. Not that I want to say that you're necessarily um, pro cop, but maybe you could talk a bit about that because usually a Marxist critique of the state, especially the coercive part, is that the cops work for the bourgeoisie. Yeah. They're to
Right.
protect bourgeois property. And so anything we can do to demoralize, demean, or decrease the police presence is a class win. And
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to say about that because it's only a class win for the bourgeois because they're the ones that are not going to suffer from its terrorism.
mm,
Because the people, the upper class and the middle to upper middle class, they've got safer areas. They're
mm,
naturally going to keep the police in their areas. You
mm,
know, when you sit there and you watch the defund, it's not like, oh, okay, we defund the police and we're just letting people rampage. They're generally rampaging in the communities that are most vulnerable to that,
mm,
right? So you're taking away police and you're letting the lumpen proles of black society and white society basically terrorize the poor of that society in the
mm,
argument that you're protecting these people. It makes sense though, because you've got to think from the bourgeois point of view. This is a textbook example of raging the masses so that they'll demand crackdowns. If you look at the rise of Italian fascism, they rose to power based on saying there's no order here.
mm,
The state can't protect the
mm,
population. We can. And that's something that the left, which is largely a bunch of lumpens anyway, lumpen and bourgeois children, they literally, get off on this stuff. There's no way of putting it. They enjoy that. Okay.
I want to quickly just go through how this was being presented or capitalized on or weaponized. I want to go through that a bit and then circle back to elaborate a bit more on what you just said. This is how the New York Times decided to go with this. A gruesome murder in North Carolina ignites a firestorm on the right. Security footage capturing the unprovoked stabbing in Charlotte became an accelerant for conservative arguments about the perceived failings of Democratic policies. You can't tell who the New York Times is for.
See, this is going to actually enrage people more and more. The Democrats, all these liberal institutions are leaping to defend liberal policy
Mhm,
failure. That's all
mhm,
they care about is to cover for the Democratic Party, which this is going to enrage people because one, you can sit there and say, look, they don't care about white lives. They don't care that a white woman died. And they get
mhm,
to throw in the face of the left. These people don't care about your safety.
mhm. It's so silly because I remember this the first time I started seeing defund the police or abolish the police.
Around 2012.
Yeah, and I remember asking people, and I was still bumping around academia then. And I remember asking people, like, well, what are the neighborhoods who have the most crime, whether it be property crime or violent crime? Where are they on this? And often the people had no idea. Yeah. So the
Yeah.
people who would be most directly affected by a reduced police presence or a drastically reduced presence or a police that's like, you know what, you want to point the finger all at us? Well, we're just going to not call. We're just going to drag our feet, all the ways that an institution or people can let you know that they're not happy with their treatment. It's not the people who are calling for this. And I'm not saying
Yeah.
that nobody in these neighborhoods was, but far and away, people don't like crime. They
Right.
don't like racist police, corrupt police, or police brutality, but they also don't like crime.
Well, see,
So
Black America and Hispanic America
mm,
and poor white America are really thrust into this position where instead of dealing with police issues, they're not going to get that. What they're going to get is an either or. Either you get increased policing where they can go after even the tiniest of things,
and
or
militarization, yeah, they're getting all this
yes,
kind of overstock or stuff that the military doesn't need. That's what
right. And
the
part of the problem has been, and this isn't talked about, is that the police go after what is easy to solve.
mm,
Okay. They're going after things that you can easily, we can close this. Why has the issue of rape always been so easily dismissed? Because cops know that it's harder to go after. So they drop it. They're like, oh, well, this is more resources. Hell with that. I won't get a promotion. Their whole things is based on metrics.
Mm.
So you have that issue. It's militarization or nothing. We're watching, what is it, in California? Like a man gets hit, punched in the face,
Mm.
and he goes, tells the cop, and the cop says, well, there's no property damage. So you've got to go through these hoops for us to actually arrest this dude. Well, you know what? If anyone could walk up and
Mm.
just punch you in the face and the cop can't do anything, we're going to get a lot of people punched in the face.
Mm. Or people taking the law into their own hands, yeah?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
Your
the
point
question,
is not, a total police state or like nothing, because we have our restorative justice meetings and our talking circles, and we work it out as if you can have that drastic of a reduction in crime without a huge political economic shift in
the
the
big thing here is that the political will at the top doesn't really care.
Mm.
Either way, you've got one side who just says, let's keep going. Whatever our programs are going to be, people just have to take it. The other side says, we can use this to get more law and order and crack down hard. You're always going to have this group that's for social discipline, right? The problem for Americans is they're not going to find any solution in the two parties. They're not going to find any solution in the left or right dissident parts that are always filtering you back
Mm.
into the Democrat and Republican Party. So you have a quagmire here where you're just getting more violence and an angrier population. So the question is, when does the society pop?
Yeah. And speaking of the more crap, this lady is Jasmine Crockett. She's a Democratic House representative from Texas. And she was on CNN, and she's saying that 80% of most violent crimes in America are due to white supremacy. Why do you think they just throw this stuff out there when it's so easy to disprove just on factual data?
Well, first, they're just saying whatever they can for their soundbite, that they're not going to get challenged on that program. But the second part is when you bring up the statistics, they will just bury the statistics and say, well, that's a white supremacist system anyway. The statistics are racist. Exactly. And it doesn't answer the problem because for me, it's like, okay, why is Black America having this issue then? I came from neighborhoods largely in Black America. I was born in Arkansas, raised in Richmond near Commerce Road, which is a Black dominated area. What do you see? You see no resources wanting to be spent in that area. You don't have anything like, you have basically people left to rot. The state doesn't do anything for them. And then you're expecting these people who you're not having any sort of resources poured into them. The only resources you have poured into Black America is to create Black bourgeois. That's
Yeah.
it. You don't have anything meant to uplift. You see opposite. The offshoring and deindustrialization came at a massive expense of Black America.
Mhm.
Okay. A lot of the poor population got sent into the service sector. What do you think is going to happen in a nation that prioritizes accumulation of capital, basically, tells people find a way of getting money, and then you have a total relaxation of police in the area, all on the argument that you can't clean up the police because, well, that would just means they'll be predating on Black America. It's a quagmire. That's all I can say on that. You can't fix this issue without fixing the problem of the government itself.
Economic relations.
Yes, it's literally seeds and means of production. That's all you've got. That's all you have in this country because you're on a treadmill. We can sit here and talk about all these nifty ideas of fixing the police force,
Mm.
but the existing powers will never implement them. They don't care about them. And if you tried to get them implemented, they'll make sure they fail.
Yeah. There's certain issues that the political duopoly is incentivized not to resolve. I can think of the gun issue, abortion, and then this. I'll just say law and order as a shorthand. They're incentivized to keep this going, to never resolve it. They get upset, they get to raise money, and it just goes on and on and on.
Yeah, why put out the fire if everyone's gonna sit there and support you? Yeah, everyone's gonna fund you to say, "Will you one day put out the fire?"
And that's across the spectrum.
We can see that it's just management strategy. Republican and Democrat is just management strategy. How are you going to manage the plebes, right?
Mm.
The reason they punt these is because they need these issues to distract people from the class. Everything is about distracting from class because these types of crimes and these types of situations, what do? It generates animosity amongst whites. For Black people, it's going to make it harder to get people to see you're not dealing with an issue of race, you're actually dealing with an issue of class. And part of the unspoken rule of the democratic society is that it really is all against all. It
Mm.
atomizes everyone, but it also forces everyone into these niche identities where everyone should be, in a way, quasi racist.
Mm.
Because you got to think about it. Black America's political capital is all based on its numbers. Becoming a larger populace
Mm.
increases its political power. And same with every
The
ethnic
same, are
group.
you saying we still have old school clientelist politics, patronage politics?
Absolutely, we do.
That can quote unquote deliver the Black vote or the Latino vote.
Well, you can look and see, like, there's definitely white liberals tend to act like they own non-white liberals. There really is a racial dynamic where the hierarchy of the liberal would be the LGBTQ first, trans at the top, and BIPOC used as like the ultimate identity. Then it filters in and it's all used to be used against conservative whites to
Mm.
just make them angry. Because you
Mm.
got to look at DEI, for example, who got kicked out and who was getting out of that situation. Well, all of it was supposed to be about helping Blacks and minorities, but white women got the majority of the benefit.
Mm.
Affirmative action is a great example of this. It really insulates white elites from competition with Asian elites because Asians are whites' greatest competition in academia.
There was a chart in Walter Ben Michaels or Adolph Reed Jr.'s book to push back at this idea about the Black wealth gap. They compare white families, Black families, Latino families. And what you see is that for the first 80%, it's pretty equal across those groups. And then it just shoots right up. So what they
Yeah.
use this graph to show is that the wealth gap is much more pronounced across class lines and race lines. You see this huge curve, and it's that way with white families, and it's that way with Black and with Latinos on down the line. And so what you see is that in any racial group in the United States, my guess is would be in other places, that you have a pronounced class division that gets
Yeah.
obscured in this talk of racial wealth gaps.
The whole racial wealth gap is literally tricking people into thinking we're going to help everyone, but it's all about creating bourgeois from the minorities and using them almost like the new racial managers, because they got rid of the racial managers with segregation, with the end of segregation, right? But by the time we get back to around 2012, 2013, we're already back to the liberals trying to bring back racial management. And you see that through representation. You see that by trying to get men and women to watch TV and be happy that you're seeing diverse millionaires now, actors. You're supposed to be happy about that. That doesn't change your life.
I remember for a brief period in time, the point was not to get too hung up on race. There seems to have been a shift from wanting to de-essentialize race to wanting to re-essentialize it, and not so much on the right, but on the left.
Yes, you're right. It happened around the time Bernie Sanders started his first go around in the primaries. There was an argument on the left that, race as a social construct, we need to get over that, right?
Mm.
But the minute Bernie Sanders started to make rumblings that he was going to run and what's the Bernie bros and all that stuff, the left liberals' rhetoric changed and the left's rhetoric changed with it. You had the rise of anti-racism and you had the rise of all these leftists with like the 1619 project and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
They elevate all these, to put bluntly, they elevate the Black militants. This has been a strategy that Christopher Lasch used to talk. They raise up the most extreme voices that are not actually arguing better programs for Black people, but arguing for this form of victimhood We're
Mm.
victims, all the things that happen to
We're
us.
going to
You know,
acknowledge your
when you,
culture. We're going to appreciate
yes,
your culture,
yes.
your African roots. Yeah.
I think what anti-racism was asking people to agree to, the whole of anti-racism was saying there's no such thing as a non-racist. Everyone's racist. And people who are anti-racist are recognizing that they're racist and they'll work against it.
Yeah.
Okay. People have already agreed that they're racist and start getting tired of that,
Mhm.
of capitulating in their
Yeah,
view.
well, and you're really bad because I mean, I don't want to presume your skin tone or your ethnicity, but I'm going to assume you're a man. And so you have
Yes.
the original, two original sins of racism and sexism, you bad persons.
Well, I mean, I think the Gaza genocide's really proven that Arab men are as valuable as cockroaches to the rest of the world.
Okay, so, okay, now I have to clock that because I was wondering, just basing this on your name. And so when you said that you were having camera problems, I was like, oh man, this is going to be my white face on this.
I'm actually very light skinned.
Yeah, a BIPOC man, I needed something.
You know what though? It's amazing when you're the BIPOC, you stop being BIPOC the minute you disagree, and then you become a white supremacist.
Oh, there you go.
I mean, literally, like I remember it was back in 2013. I had a big argument with this socialist over the rhetoric they're using about white people. I said, I don't see the constructiveness of saying that all whites are racist because that basically means that I'm conceding that the natural state of white people is to be racist and that we're trying to make them not racist, which just means that I'm making it easier for fascists to argue, hey, we're all racist. Why are we pretending? And what was fighting against me? What was sitting there attacking me, calling me a white racist? White people.
Mm.
How did that make sense? And the one that was going after me, I'll never forget it. His name was Serafin Jade. He was a tranny. And I kept on saying, I'm sorry if I'm saying things that make people angry, but I'm kind of like, I'm old. I don't care anymore. But he was going off, and I said, listen, guy, you're white. For you to sit here and attack me, if all whites are racist, you're a racist.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
Go work on your racism.
yeah, work on your racism. You got a BIPOC man telling you to
Mm.
shut up. You're sitting there arguing, being racist.
Mhm.
You prove your own point. It's you who's racist.
So Van Jones was saying this man was hurting. He didn't want people to lose sight of the fact that there was two victims. And Mays said, talking about Van Jones, they see racism everywhere except in the black guy who kills a white girl and then says afterwards, I got that white girl. Um, and I had to throw a Zionist in here because I don't know who is better at making something about them, the Zionist or the transgender crowd.
They're both the same to me. They're 100%. There's
But
no difference.
anyway, this person, Wexler, said a lot of people on the right are outraged by the murder of Iryna Zarutska and are calling for her killer to get the death penalty. They should be. Now imagine 1,200 Irynas. Now, do you understand Israel?
Yeah, I do, because they killed a whole bunch of Palestinian women. Everything about Israel is about like forgetting what the Israelis do. Like we go and murder half your population. Think of us as like, benign.
Why do you make
innocent.
us do this to you? Yeah. But they're so silly because, I mean, it's the accufession. Actually, if you want to use this as an analogy, the arenas are Palestinians, and the guy who just got up and started stabbing her and walked off nonchalantly would be the IDF or I mean, this is referenced October 7th, and we don't know how many people were killed by the IDF versus Hamas, but we know that a large number of Israelis were killed by the IDF. So yeah, if you want to use this analogy, Ms. Wexler, you may want to give it a little think.
We know because the Israelis have already talked about it. Much of that number was killed by the Israelis. I'm going to be rather callous on this because I don't really care about these people. Most of those people were reservists. So they were military. So not a single one do I feel sorry for. These are not innocent people. They knew what they're doing. They're sitting there having a rave at the gates of Gaza,
Yeah, well, they just wanted to dance. I might have you back when I do my episode on the cult of the Israeli hostage. because a lot of cleaning goes on once they become a hostage. You have the settlers, which are illegal. The settlers are part and partial of the defense or occupation apparatus. You have mandatory conscription. So you have mandatory conscription for a couple of years. You have people that stay in, but like you said, they become reservists. And then you have
Mhm.
all the people who have to manage the occupation, the apartheid. So it gets really difficult to make this case that some people wanted to do, like out of nowhere. All of a sudden, my
Finkelstein.
neighbor went crazy.
Well, Norman Finkelstein said that with Israel, one of the big problems you have is that the majority of the population has participated in the occupation. So you have a hard time arguing innocence when it comes to Israel because it's a part of the population. It's a country that has so much of its people being a part of this problem.
Mm.
And with the modern framing, it's like the citizen is innocent, the citizen is innocent. Well, in Israel, majority of the citizens have been a part of it. How do you rationalize them?
I didn't know that going in, yeah. Especially the people that take them up on their birthright offer to come and get a house. Anyway, I just to bring that up because they can really make it about them. Yes. So I don't know who this person is. It was on TikTok, and he wanted to explain to Carlos Brown, who was the guy who just randomly got up and killed that young woman by stabbing her 4 or 5 times. This is the natural response to 400 plus years of oppression. Expect more just like him. Are these people stupid or getting paid? A race war might sound nice to you, but if too many people take this seriously, especially people of the mindset that, separate is better, white nationalists, or we need more racial segregation and separation, and they start saying stuff like this. I mean, do you have anything to say? Do you think these guys are just doing it for clicks?
No, I think
You
I
know?
think a lot of people started believing this stuff after they started going through college because you have a lot of the colleges teaching them decolonial theory, white supremacy, and all that, and then you have them being like, you need to show your outrage against white supremacy, whatever the white people get, they deserve, and it's like, well, that's really cool if this is going to stay in academia and you're going to keep your like moralism there, but if you're going to bring this attitude to the general population, well, that's just going to be used by, white supremacists to say, yeah, they want to fight us.
Who was
And
that guy? The guy who wrote Dilbert? Remember that?
I know who you're
Yeah,
talking.
I think what got him in the firestorm was
Scott
that
Adams, yeah.
Scott Adams, yeah, he took people saying stuff like that and said white people should listen to this and act accordingly or move accordingly. People are like, "Oh, this is terrible," blah blah blah. And okay, but if you take people at their word, and this is out there, it's also so hilarious. It's like, dude, most of the guns and the power is still with the people you're saying expect more of this to.
There's never been a time where the majority is going to get crushed by the minority unless a foreign state comes in and provides the
Mm,
military to do it.
mm,
Um, I think a lot of this is hemmed by the liberal nonsense of power dynamic. The liberal left think, oh, well, since you're powerless, you can say whatever you like. That's why you can have rat femmes that sit there and talk about genociding men. We can talk like this because we're powerless. Well,
mm,
what happens when somebody starts reading you and starts saying, well, this is what they think.
mm,
And hey, guys, we're all getting poor because once back 2008, 2009, you had the whole like anti-Arab thought and discussion became more virulent during 2008, 2009 because, well, everyone started getting poor. The recession
mm,
hit. What do people do? They immediately start pointing fingers, wanting people to blame, and they want an easy excuse. That's the thing. People want an
mm,
easy ability. This is the problem. And so you have this, you have what literally it's like from 2012 to now, all the left and liberals have been doing is turning America into the driest tinder for fascism. Because I was sitting there thinking about like Haas of infrared of ACP, how they've pushed back against much of the excesses, trying to take communism away from this concept that it is like this anti-family, anti-heterosexuality politic.
mm.